Welcome back to the Tool Crib. Today we're going to be looking at the Gerber Truss. Now, the Gerber Truss retails for $52 from Gerber Gear. But before I started shooting this video, I checked on Amazon and it was selling between $30 and $35 from multiple different vendors. So when you consider the price point, $30 in 2019 for a decently equipped multi-tool is a really good value. It really is. Now, one of the competitors to the Truss is going to be something like the Leatherman Rebar, the Leatherman Wave, and we're just going to use the Wave as an example. The Wave is a $100 multi-tool, and it is definitely an A-grade multi-tool. The Truss is $30 or 30% of the value of the Leatherman Wave. So what you have to ask yourself is the Truss worth 30% of the value of the Wave? You can literally buy 3 Gerber Trusses for the price of one Leatherman Wave. Well, ultimately, that's going to be up for you to decide, but hopefully this video will help answer some of those questions. Now, we're going to get through the specs first, and then we're going to walk through the tool set, and then I'm going to kind of show you what I found out by testing this particular multi-tool out, kind of the positives and the negatives. And then I'll give you my opinion on whether or not I think it's worth the 30% of the value of the Wave. Let's get started. Now, while I run through the specs, I wanted to bring the Wave in, put it side by side to kind of give you a comparison as to the size of this particular multi-tool. So the truss is 4 1/8 of an inches long, or about 105 millimeters. At its widest point, which is going to be on the back end here, it is 1 7/8 inches, or about 48 millimeters. And its depth is going to be 13/16 of an inch. Now that's measuring to the outside of the tool latch releases, and that's going to be 21 millimeters. It weighs in at 8.25 ounces, or about 235 grams. So all things considered, it's not a super heavy multi-tool. It's actually just slightly lighter in weight than the Leatherman Wave Plus. Before hopping into the tool set, I kind of want to show you the sheath that it comes with. So it has this dual carry sheath. You can carry it vertical or horizontal. It's not the greatest sheath, and it's Velcro closure, but it does seat the multi-tool fairly well. It's just a little flimsy in my opinion, but when you consider that this is a $30 multi-tool, it's not like we're going to get high quality leather with it. But let's jump around in the tools, and we're going to start with the outside tools. And by the way, all the tools are going to be locking. And I want to notate there that in this housing here, we have a lanyard attachment point. So you can attach a lanyard to it. And all the tools lock out. Well, the first one is going to be the knife blade. Now, Gerber doesn't really say what the steel is on their knife blades. It's not going to be as quality as a 420HC, but they're not super bad, and they're pretty easy to sharpen up. One of the things that I don't necessarily like about this, and that's because I like a little bit longer blade. This blade measures in at 2 1/4 inches long, or about 57 millimeters. I actually like to have a minimum of a 2.5 inch blade, especially on this mid-range multi-tool. And this is actually a little bit larger frame than the Wave, which has almost a 3-inch blade. So I just think the blade is a little too short for it. Now, it doesn't come out extremely sharp either, but that can be alleviated by some sharpening. It's decent for what it is, I guess, for a Chinese manufactured multi-tool, but it just did not come out great for sharpness. You can see it's kind of trying to want to work, but not really. The next tool over is a tool that I don't really like that much. So we got our larger flat driver. This is a 3/16 flat driver, and they try to incorporate this little file. Now the hatching on the file is not very aggressive at all, and it's just like the Leatherman Free P4. It's just too short to be able to get any kind of real use out of it. Does it file a little bit? Yeah, but it is definitely not by any stretch of the imagination great. On the back, they have a little bit of a depth gauge. Now, what I will say, they call it a ruler, but this thing is just too short to be using as, what are you going to measure at 1.5 inches? But it does make a pretty good depth gauge, and I really like the etching in here because it really lays it out. So you got 1 centimeter, 2, 3, and 4 centimeters, and then they divide the inches in quarter marks, and I do like that. That for people who need a tool where they using it as a depth gauge, that is pretty well done actually. Next tool over, well, I'm having a little trouble with that mechanism there. Next tool over is their awl. Now, I'm going to bring in the Center Drive Plus. This awl on the Center Drive Plus is actually a pretty decent awl. And the way they made it with that, with the cut edge here to use as a reamer, it actually works pretty good, and it has a super sharp point on it. For the Gerber Truss, the grind on this is really weird. It's almost ground like a knife. And so it doesn't, I've tried it a little bit, and it'll make a divot, but it really does not drill. So it should be okay for punching through like leather or something, or if you want to make a starting point for a screw in wood. But beyond that, it's really not going to drill. It's basically just a little punch is what it is. I wouldn't consider it a reaming awl by any means. Next tool over is a little funky. Now, they have I believe that's an 1/8 inch driver. It might be 3/6. No, it's 1/8 inch. 1/8 inch flat driver on the end that's kind of ground in there. And then they have their can opener on the front side, and then they have their bottle cap lifter on the back side. I haven't really tried that, and I'm just not sure why they would make it. Just looks weird, but I haven't really tried it to know if that works well or not. Next tool over are the scissors. Now, Gerber, which is owned by Fiskar, and Fiskar makes really good scissors. They really do. But on their multi-tools, it's somewhat lacking because these are being produced in China, and I don't know if they're not living up to the specs of a Fiskar for their scissors, or what the situation is. But these, they're decent. They're okay for light duty tasks. So for paper, one thing I'm going to say about them is they have a really great spring back action, and more so than some of the others. And I've got the Juice S2 here. The Juice S2, you notice how it kind of lags a little bit when it's opening back up. It's not as aggressive as a recoil as you're going to have on these little Fiskars. They really bounce back, and that's great for cutting right through paper. Does an outstanding job on paper. So if you're using it for just light duty tasks, then it should be fine. Now on cardboard, it gets through it. It's just the way the design, you notice it really comes up. And so good scissors, now in fact, let me bring in the Surge scissors here. Scissors like the Surge, where the cut edge is in line with the handle like this, really allows it to cut straight through larger stuff with relative ease, because it's not trying to push over the hump of that little of the handles themselves. You see how the cardboard is kind of pushing into that handle there instead of bypassing it. So you really have to get down low. You kind of have to force it to get through larger stuff. So it doesn't make a great pair of scissors if you're trying to cut through some more I can't find the right word. I don't know why. More sturdy material like cardboard, a little bit more rigid material is what I was trying to say. Now, cutting on paracord, they did not do a good job at all. So they just tend to roll over. The cut edge is just not ground correctly, and I really struggled cutting through paracord with them. I was able to get through it at some point, but it was terrible. So I had to hit this 4, 5, 6, 7 different times, and you can see the cut that leaves. It's just not great. Now, for a little bit of comparison, let's bring the surge in here, and the surge will zip right through it. And we have the Juice S2 over here, so let's try it. And the Juice S2 gets through there with relative ease. And now we've got the little SD Classic from Victorinox. Now, Victorinox really knows how to make scissors, and even that little SD Classic has super great scissors. So the scissors on the truss are just not fantastic. Two things that I do like about them for light duty cutting tasks though. The first is that spring back that I mentioned. And the second is I love how they bent this piece over to give you a nice thumb rest. On some of their other multi-tools, and one that comes to mind is the suspension. On the suspension they didn't do that, and so if you're trying to cut through anything that's really like cardboard, then that handle really digs deep into your thumb, and it is very uncomfortable. But these are much more comfortable because of the fact that they doubled that over, they rolled that edge, and that makes a great surface to set your thumb on. So those are two positives about the scissors themselves. They're a little short, but for light duty cutting tasks, if you're just using them to cut paper, they're going to be great. Now, on the other side, we have a mostly serrated blade, and I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I like this. It's decent. It's not terrible, but it's not the greatest either. It does an okay job, but you can see it kind of rips that a little bit. So it gets through paracord. I haven't tried it on anything much larger than that, but on the whole, it's not bad. Next tool over is going to be 1/4 inch driver, and this will also double as a light duty pry tool. Now it has the wire stripping functionality in here, but with wire stripping, if you can't set it against the frame, and this one is not too awful bad, but you really can't rotate this around to get it wants to slip out. So if you're using this as a wire stripper and you're trying to rotate this thing inside of this tool, it's just not easy to do, and it really doesn't do a good job. I would rather just use the knife blade. Now the next tool over I do like. The next tool over is their number 2 Phillips, and that gives you a pretty decent reach, and it's pretty solid actually. Now one thing I found with this as well is you can actually use something like the Leatherman adapter kit. Now it fits a little bit loose, but you can actually slip that over there and give yourself the ability to add on some extra bits if you wanted to put on something like a Leatherman. So that is one positive with that number 2 Phillips. I do like the reach on it, and I do like the Phillips itself. And then the last tool over is our saw. Now the saw is a little bit short also. It seems to be decently aggressive, and it does an okay job. It's not as good as a Victorinox saw, and it's not as good as a Leatherman saw, but it is decent and will get some decent cutting tasks done. Definitely not going to be up to par or up to the ability of the Waves saw for any means. Well, now let's get it open, and here's where I think the truss kind of shines. Now Gerber uses this particular plier design in a couple of their multi-tools. They use it in the suspension, they use it here in the truss, and they use it in the suspension NXT. And I actually like this. And we've got let me get the Center Drive Plus back in here because I want to kind of compare it against that. So now the Center Drive Plus has a much beefier plier, and they're both spring loaded. The spring mechanism is one good thing, one positive. That I like the spring loaded pliers on here. They work pretty nicely. Now the spring loaded pliers on the Center Drive Plus are actually bypass cutters for the cutting mechanism for those carbide cutters, where on the NXT, or excuse me, on the truss, they are anvil type. But I will say this, I do like these cutters better. I like them better because I just cannot stand the carbide cutters on the other types of different Gerber models. Now the needle nose comes down to a fairly nice point. I really do like the needle nose. It's pretty solid too. I can move it just slightly, but they're really pretty solid. And that's one of the reasons why I like butterfly pliers, even if it's in a spring-loaded plier like this. They're just much more solid than what you get. You don't have that rattle from the slide mechanism on different Gerbers. So this is definitely a much more solid plier. I like the grind profile around it too. It's just the plier is one of the things that I like the most about this particular multi-tool. So the needle nose are very, very fine. Has a great tip up here. Good area for wire cutting. Now, it does have a little bit of a notch for hardwire cutting. I haven't really tested on hardwire as of yet. I was more interested in how it did cutting soft wire. So I've got some 12 gauge here we're going to cut through. And you can see it does a pretty decent job, and it really, without much effort at all, it got right through that. Now, let's bring the Center Drive Plus in here, which has those carbide cutters, and we'll get a position there. And you can see the Center Drive Plus will get through it, but it takes a couple of times because these carbide cutters are just not great. They're just not. So I actually like these pliers on the truss much better than I do those of the Center Drive Plus, or the Center Drive for that matter. I like these pliers. I like the fact that they're spring loaded. I really like the design of them. I think they're pretty good actually. Now some people are going to criticize the anvil cutters, but as long as they do their job, I really don't have a problem with them not being bypass cutters. This is not a tool that I think you're going to consider, as a heavy duty multi-tool where it's going to be doing heavier work. I would imagine that that's kind of the limit of what it's going to be used for, is cutting soft wire like that. And if it accomplishes that job, then how can you complain about it? I really do like the pliers, and this is definitely the strong suit, or definitely the top thing that I like about the truss is the plier design. Well, let's bring in, and we're gonna kind of talk about if this thing is really worth its value. And I'm probably going to bring a couple other multi-tools in here, kind of give you some comparisons as to how I'm forming my opinions. Now, the first thing that's a little disconcerting to me for this size of multi-tool is the blade itself. Over here on the left we have the Juice S2, and then we have the Truss, the SOG Power Pint, and then the Leatherman Wave. And these two multi-tools are really very much smaller than the Truss, but yet they have almost as long of a blade. That is kind of one of the downfalls. And the Wave, which is actually a little bit shorter frame multi-tool, has a much beefier knife blade. And the knife blade is one of the things that's important to me on a multi-tool. So I definitely take some points off of the Truss for that, and the fact that it doesn't come out super sharp. Now, if you're okay with it's just not going to come out sharp out of the factory. Obviously, you can sharpen it up, and the steel on a Gerber will sharpen up fairly easily, and it doesn't hold its edge for a super long time, but it does okay. It's not great, but it's not bad either. Now, the driver capability on the Truss, I'm really okay with. It has a pretty decent selection of drivers. So you have 3 different flat drivers, and then the number 2 Phillips. And the Phillips, because it will accept adapters from other multi-tool manufacturers, I'm really okay with that. I think that's fine. I kind of like the Phillips, and I'm okay with this multi-tool not having something like a bit exchanger, because when you really got to keep the price in mind of what this thing costs. So for driver functionality, I think it does a not fantastic job, but it does a very, very good job. Now the saw blade is a little disappointing because, it really just comes down to length. It has pretty aggressive teeth, and it does a good job of cutting. It's just a little short to get a whole lot of work done, even for a medium duty size multi-tool. I actually do like the scissors though, even though they're not very capable when it comes to cutting stuff like paracord. I think in a multi-tool like this, they really cut paper great. And actually, they cut paper better than some of the others I've used. And the spring back mechanism is definitely one of the pluses to these scissors. I think they're okay, and I actually kind of like them. Now, if you're using your multi-tool to cut on a little bit larger stuff like paracord, it's not something that's going to work out well for you. But if you're just using them for light duty tasks, then they are fantastic. Now, one of the multi-tools that this is going to more closely compete against is going to be either the Wingman or the Sidekick. And here I have the Wingman. Both of them have pretty decent pliers for these spring-loaded pliers. I do like, honestly, I actually like the truss pliers a little bit better. Even though the Wingmans open up a little wider, which you can see, has a better grip angle. I like the design of those truss pliers, and I think for most light duty tasks they're going to be just fine. And the handle angle, even though they open up a little wider, you can see at the handle angle, even though it has this wider portion on the back of the truss, it's actually a little bit less than that of the Wingman. But overall, both of these pliers are okay in my book. They really are. And the fact that it's spring-loaded, that's beneficial. I know a lot of people like spring-loaded pliers, and I don't mind spring-loaded pliers. I don't necessarily need them as long as there's good action on the pliers themselves. But when you're accustomed to something like that, it's kind of hard to go back or get away from it. So spring-loaded pliers is definitely a plus, and I really do like those pliers. One last thing I want to touch on with the Gerber Truss, and that's its overall design. You see this kind of V shape in the suspension NXT, and in the truss. And the reason that they do that, is so that they can put longer tools in the center. One of the limitations to other multi-tools, and the Wave is no exception to this, is that the center tools in the middle have to be quite a bit shorter. They can't really be out here longer because the pliers, when they close, would interfere with them. Well, by opening this design up and making it go out wider at the back side, they're able to get a little bit longer tools in there, and that's why they're able to get such a long Phillips driver in here for one, and some of the other tools on the other side as well. So while I don't necessarily like that design, it has a few hot spots in the open position. But one thing I will say is that in the closed position. In the open position, though, they do a very nice job here. Nice rounded edges. You really don't have any hot spots. So that is something I forgot to touch on. That is another plus to this multi-tool. So anyway, that's kind of, I wanted to touch on why they designed this multi-tool like this. And it's simply for the fact that they can get a little longer implements in the middle there. Well, we've hit on some of the high points and the low points of the truss. So now it comes down to, do you think it's worth the value? In my opinion, it is. I definitely think it is. Now, would it be worth the $52 that Gerber's asking for it? That might be stretching it. But if you're able to pick this up all day long for $30 to $35, I think this is a can't miss. It's not an A-grade multi-tool. It's going to fall somewhere around the B- for me. It's a decent multi-tool with a decent amount of capability. A couple things that I don't like that much. Other things that I do like. So the knife blades is one of the big things, and the fact that they're not really one-handed opening. I mean, they're a little tough. I don't really like the slide mechanism. Of course, a lot of multi-tools have them, and that's just kind of nitpicking. But overall, I think it's more of a B- multi-tool. It definitely has some capability to it, though, and with 17 different functions and a $30 price point, it's kind of hard to say no to. It really is, especially if you're on a tight budget. At any rate, my review of the Gerber Truss. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.